Alright everyone, Kim Jong-un and the North Korean press have claimed that there was a plot, possibly foiled or in the works, between the Republic of Korea, that is South Korea, and the United States to try to assassinate Kim Jong-un, predicating, of course, the jailing of a fourth U.S. citizen there, another person who worked at Pyongyang University. I would think if you're teaching classes in North Korea, now might be a good time to take a vacation and not bother coming back, let's face it. However, the claim is possibly true. Most of the time when the North Korean press claims something, usually it's either some degree of hyperbole or it's an outright fabrication. This time, though, you can't really criticize them because there probably is such a plot. Yeah, there are probably all sorts of contingency plans for trying to blow Kim Jong-un away. Destroy and cripple his regime. In fact, Trump has openly alluded to this fact, as well as the South Koreans, the possibility of reunifying the peninsula without having a war, specifically by erasing the leadership. The military then falls into disarray, there's some infighting, and potentially things destabilize, and you don't have to fight an actual war of reunification and liberation. So it's entirely possible. In fact, if the United States thought, if our government thought for a moment that it had an opportunity to kill Kim Jong-un and maybe some of his military brass and some of these others that are more central to his policies, and to get away with it, to do so in such a way that it wouldn't cause a war and that in fact it would cause the North Korean regime to collapse into some variant of infighting, civil war, or revolution, so that the North Koreans themselves liberated their own nation, and then adopted some sort of system that allowed them to immediately reunify, you can bet your ass that that would definitely be considered as a possibility. So the North Korean press is probably not too far off here. Now, whether there was an active plot that they're actually physically talking about, whether they uncovered some sort of secretive plot to kill Kim Jong-un, remains to be seen. Of course, that would be beyond top secret in the U.S. Military. It would certainly be top secret within South Korea if that were the case. There could be some North Korean spy within South Korea that got wind of such a plot, fed that info back to the DPRK, and that's how they found out about such a thing. But there doesn't necessarily have to be an active plot to undo the regime there, because there probably has been an ongoing plan to do so since the 1950s in some form or another at most times. So the claim, while not evidenced, is certainly valid, is certainly capable of being seen as true, because it's almost certainly on the table at any given time. But then again, so is a preemptive strike on North Korea. So is a general invasion of North Korea. So is attempting, and this has been the operative plan, the one that hasn't worked, strangulate their economy until the regime collapses, which never worked, never will work, should be abandoned. Sanctions don't do anything, clearly, to the North Korean state, because it conducts some business on the black market, some with China, in realms that even they, even under stress, they'll never agree to such sanctions. Coal, yes, maybe. Minerals, yeah, probably not. Therefore, we need a different solution to the problem. Otherwise, by kicking the can down the road, what will happen is North Korea will develop multi-stage nuclear weapons, which poses a greater risk, by the way, than just, they're going to mount it on a missile and threaten to hit California or something. It poses a greater risk. What if they were to create such a weapon, which can be scaled infinitely, in theory, and compile one and use all of this inert material that adds to the primary explosion in creating such a weapon, and simply parks it near the DMZ and lets loose 100 megatons of blast? If you have the ability to create a multi-stage nuclear weapon at all, then you have the capability to scale it to infinity. Now, it becomes far less efficient to do so, but if your goal is simply to let loose one god almighty explosion that wipes Seoul off the map, while sacrificing several hundred square miles of your own territory just to cripple your enemy as part of a preemptive strike on South Korea, which is certainly a contingency they must have in their own files, so to speak, if that's your goal, then all you need is the basic technology to build a multi-stage weapon in the first place, and then you have no more problems. It's entirely possible that such a weapon could be built. The Soviets, quite some time ago, they had the Tsar Bomba, 50 megatons roughly. Their original plan called for boosting it to 100. Can you imagine the size of the explosion if North Korea were actually to figure out how to do this? And maybe they're a decade away, maybe they're 4 decades away from doing so. Eventually, though, it comes to a head. They develop the idea. All they need is to make one other working atomic weapon, build it the same way they did before, padding this other material around it so that it's multi-stage, and then keep adding layer upon layer upon layer of this material. And they could make a 500 megaton nuclear weapon. And most of its components would be absolutely inert until the actual time of explosion. Now, they get a declining rate of return, but can you imagine the chaos that would cause? See, the thing is, we have to look at the nuclear states, how they developed nuclear weapons, and what the ultimate goals were in creating their nuclear deterrent. The United States heavily favored smaller weapons. It realized that there was a declining rate of return. So it worked more on missile technology and created smaller weapons. Most of our weapons in the U.S. arsenal range from a half a megaton upwards to 2 or 3 megatons. Relatively small compared to the Russian weapons, which sometimes you have multiple warheads creating a 30 megaton weapon, the Satan missile. Absolutely gigantic, not as large as the Tsar Bomba, but doesn't need to be. It's that if you got 30 megatons of blast in your weapon, you can be 10 miles, you can hit it 10 miles away from your target because your targeting technology isn't quite up to snuff. And it doesn't really matter, everybody there's still going to die. It's going to cause a massive firestorm, the radiation released will be substantial. Now, you've got an 8 warhead fucking weapon, no problems. You don't have to exactly hit your mark every time. It's not like US systems, they can be smaller because they're more adequately targeted. They're more reliable. Russian systems were less reliable, their targeting technology was substandard, so they simply scaled them upwards. But because all this secondary material is inert, it doesn't matter if you have to do that. You just make the missile bigger. You make it capable of carrying such a payload because it's heavier. It's all you have to do. And if you're going to park it in one place, you don't even need to worry about a missile. Be a little bit like Dr. Strangelove mode. Such a weapon could be packed with secondary material to increase fallout as well. You could have, crate after crate of, mediocre radioactive waste that just falls back into its footprint and leaves a glowing crater in its wake. You could do that. It's within North Korea's technical capabilities to approach that already. But, I mean, the theories are already out there as far as, boosting these weapons. And it'll happen with time, because they're not going to give up their atomic program. Unless somebody strikes their atomic program and sets them back to stage 1, so that they have to rebuild everything, or invades and reunifies the peninsula, they will continue to attempt to build such a weapon. And once they do, by the way, you'll no longer have the option of not acting. Even the Chinese would act at that point. There would be an invasion. And it would be very bloody because it wouldn't be preemptive. The North Koreans would immediately know, by testing this weapon at all, we're probably going to get invaded. So what would they do if they were smart? They would build several identical weapons anytime they intend to test one. The others would be already in place to destroy advancing militaries, probably one at the DMZ, through whatever route they think is going to be invaded the most heavily. One would be up near the Chinese border. They test their weapon. If it doesn't work, no problem. They take the other weapons and move them back too, to set up for the next test. If it succeeds, those weapons now are already in place, and any advancing army potentially gets crushed. That would be what they would do if they were smart. In fact, they could probably kill off the entire advanced force that would be sent in from China. They could probably kill half of the US troops and a significant proportion of South Korean troops on and near the DMZ at the time that the invasion actually occurs. In fact, it would so deplete the manpower of the South Korean military and the US forces there that it would take quite some time to actually mount a response. They could also, potentially, couple this with standard atomic weapons that would be dropped on or near US naval groups, potentially used to strike Seoul if the city's not already debilitated. The loss of life would number probably in the tens of millions on the first day of fighting. It would be catastrophic for South Korea. It'd be catastrophic for China. It'd be catastrophic for the U.S. Navy. It'd certainly be catastrophic for North Korea, because the immediate response of the U.S. probably wouldn't be to deploy nuclear weapons. It would be to deploy standard weapons. But what about China? Do you think they'd be so restrained? No, their people would call for blood and fire. They would rain down atomic weapons on Pyongyang and probably level that city. They'd probably attack all the other major urban centers in North Korea with both standard and nuclear weapons. And pretty soon there wouldn't really be a North Korea anymore. In fact, we might want to look at the possibility, I know this sounds slightly strange, of attempting to liberate North Korea specifically to prevent the Chinese from massacring them. Because there's some bad blood there anyway, and the North Korean military and their leadership might be crazy enough to actually attempt to put a nuclear weapon on the Chinese border and wipe out all those soldiers there that would be drawn up. They'd probably kill tens of thousands of them at least. It wouldn't deplete Chinese manpower, but it would be an enormous crisis. It's possible for them to do this. The technology's there. There are multiple nations in the world that already have this tech. So, by the way, too, do Russia and China. They both have multi-stage nuclear weapons. What if the North Koreans manage to infiltrate one or both of these nations and bring that technology back and begin building it? They've certainly got enough minerals required to make these inert material shells to put around their atomic weapon to make it multi-stage. It's a small price to pay for losing a bunch of spies trying to do so. They've probably been trying to do so for decades now. It's probably one reason. Maybe the Chinese have given up on North Korea specifically because they got wind that they were trying to steal nuclear designs or something like that. Has anyone even considered this possibility? But the idea that there's no assassination plot that the U.S. or South Korea would dream up, I think is wrong. I think there are such plots. There are probably multiple such plots at any given time that can be put into play at a moment's notice under the right criteria. So that aspect of North Korean media, yeah, it's not fake news. It's probably very much real. That's about all. Peace out.